Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Payments Leaders Show, where I have a fireside chat with handpicked leaders from the payments industry. They share how they lead their people, how they create winning and human-centric cultures that actually embrace opportunities before they meet the challenges. As we know, one of the most difficult and greatest challenges in the payments industry is how do you build a culture that enables people to reach their potential, yet make market making and realizing high performance for the company. And one of the most accomplished is Cian Fitzpatrick. So Cian, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
So introduction for Cian, he is the SVP and head of EMEA for TransferMate, which is a rapidly high growth organization in the FX space. He's an experienced payments professional who's had an exceptional level of growth throughout his career. And we're connected by our good friend Anand Patel. So better shout out to Anand today because he always loves a shout out. So Anand, thank you for connecting us last October, actually, the award ceremony. And Cian, thank you so much. I know just how busy your schedule is. You just completed your MBA on top of your all travel commitments. So really appreciate your time today. So thank you.
Yeah, no, look, absolutely, Adrian, and delighted to be asked on. And look, most importantly, good that we gave Anand his mention. Look, it's been great since Anand's connected us, so very appreciative, but not at all, delighted and honoured to be asked on, Adrian.
Pleasure. So I wonder if we could sort of dive straight in. And I wonder if you could share the foundation that has made you whom you are today as an individual and as a leader.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think to your question, there's really two pieces to that. So from my perspective, who you are as an individual and who you are as a leader, can be viewed in two separate ways. I think, it ultimately converges at a point in time as well. But from an individual perspective, I think it's quite clear for me. Foundation obviously implies, early on, I think a lot of that for me was formed when I was particularly at a young age. So my parents and my family would have had a big impact on how
Sure.
I was shaped and formed today. And really, I think that comes down to your moral compass and
Yep.
which way your values point. Because for me, one of the key things that I take, not only from a leadership and a professional perspective, but also just in life, is that, people interact and do business with people, right,
Yep.
across the
Yep.
board. And I take a very, very people centric approach. So having the right level of integrity and honesty is really, really important. And I think, talent can be taught, right, and skills can be taught. How you are centered as an individual most definitely cannot. So from an individual perspective, I think really how I was raised at a young age has given me the foundation to grow as a person. And then I suppose to the second part of your question, as a leader. And I think what's really, really important as a leader is that you need to understand that you never stop learning. So the day that you stop learning, you're losing straight away. And from a very early age in my career, I've always had some level of mentorship, whether that was family, whether that was bosses, and I suppose we talk about people who influence you as a person. And from a professional perspective, I think mentorship is a really key part of that.
Mm.
And that's continued the whole way through, Adrian. So from an early start when I was an individual contributor within different organizations to when I took on my first team, my first level of responsibility, my first P&L, I have always had some form of mentorship and guidance. And I think that's really, really critical because there's always been somebody before you who's been successful in that type of
Yeah.
role. There have been successful commercial leaders. There have been people in high growth organizations like I'm in right now, where we're a rapidly growing unicorn, to my previous company who are, decades old, payments
Sure.
behemoth. So I think having the right level of mentorship from a leadership perspective is really important. But then I think recognizing that the two of those things aren't so different is
Yeah.
probably what roots me to who I am today, both as an individual and as a leader. Because if you don't take those, I suppose, personal skills or your personal
Mm.
foundation into the professional environment, I ultimately think that you'll fail.
Yeah.
So for me, I suppose merging the two has done a hell of a lot to create who I am, both as an individual and as a leader as well.
Brilliant. No, I love that. I think you're right. A lot of us are shaped by our upbringing, and our parents obviously have a significant amount on that. But I loved what you said there about never stop learning. It's the day you start losing. And excellent, great foundation for our conversation. So I wonder if we could dive a little bit deeper on that and like, what are the values then that help you drive you and help your organization as you say, steer that compass, steer the growth? What are the value set that's defined you?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you'll probably notice as a trend with me today, I kind of like to break my answers up into pairs. So
No worries. Good.
I'll start again with the first part. So I suppose if we break it up into part one, I think those early stage values are key as the foundation, and I suppose the base as to how you can grow uh, to drive yourself and help your organization as well, as you progress throughout your career and as you bring ultimate success for the business, which is what your behaviors really need to drive. So from my perspective, I think you have to have a certain level of integrity in how you operate.
Yep.
Number one, right? I think that's critically important to anybody who's doing business, but also, in the type of business that we're in, is particularly in the payments world that's heavily regulated.
Yeah, yeah.
I think a good level of integrity and closely followed by, I would say, honesty / transparency
Yeah,
is quite important. So, I don't mind if people make mistakes as long as they own them. And move forward. So I think being able to leverage those level of values as a leader
sure.
is critically important to me. And I think probably the one that's most important for me as an individual and as a leader, and the only way
Sure.
an organization can be successful, is to create an environment that fosters trust.
Yep.
If you're not on the same page as your team, as your client, or your partner, again, similar to if you're not learning, you're losing, you're setting yourself up for failure. So I think that creation of trust is really, really important for me. So I suppose those are the three core values and principles for me that would
Mm.
steer how I bring myself into an organization. Now, how does that actually help the organization? I think you need to take it a level deeper and say, when you're looking at the different people that you bring into an organization, that you lead, and that you're part of a team, I think you actually go values over experience. Right. And
Okay.
I've mentioned this in some way, shape, or form before. You can gain experience, you can teach skills, you can train somebody on a product. You can't instill core values in people. So if people are not on the right
Yeah.
moral compass, or at
Yeah.
least the same wavelength culturally for you as a business, I think it's ultimately going to be a wrong fit, no matter how
Yeah.
good they
Yeah.
are at the
Sure.
raw skills. So, from a value perspective, I think that's really, really important. And then authenticity, I suppose, shapes that.
Sure.
Brings that
Sure.
brings that piece full circle. So I mentioned at the start of this discussion that ultimately, when you talk about skills as an individual or as a leader, for me, they converge. I think what's really, really
Mm.
important for myself is that you don't become something you're not. You need to be authentic in who you are in order to appropriately lead teams and create an environment where they can be successful. And only if your people are successful can you ultimately get to the goal
Sure.
of a successful organization. So I suppose taking it a level deeper to recap that, I think there's a core set of values and principles that drive me. I think when I look at how we lead a team, I think values are more
Yeah.
important than the experiences themselves, but also authenticity to make sure that you're being exactly who you are
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
that situation is really, really important.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
people can see through it if you're not. So for me, that's really what drives me. And I suppose when you put all of that into one package, it creates for me the ability to be my best self, to
Sure. Sure.
appropriately lead a team,
Show up. Yeah.
to remain motivated,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
come back every day, because if you don't have that mindset and fire as a person, or certainly for me anyway,
Yeah.
I can't be successful and I can't bring value to our organization. So as long as I line that up first, I think any of the other challenges that come up along the way just become opportunities for you to create
Brilliant.
value, right?
Brilliant. Brilliant. Can I just decide? There's so much there that I want to dive into, but I'd
Yeah.
love to. So they're a very similar value set to myself. So can I just start with that first one? What does integrity actually mean to you personally? Well, because that word can mean many different things to many different people. What does it mean to you?
So for me, integrity means two different things, right?
Yeah.
So the first piece of it was my follow-on point around the right level of honesty and having the right set of
Sure.
moral principles.
Yeah.
Um, to progress yourself as a person as you develop into an organization or as you improve yourself. As I said at the start, if you're not learning, you're losing, right?
Yeah.
But I think pulling in a sense of being whole and I suppose undivided is really, really important to that.
Yeah.
Because if you have the right level of integrity, once you make a decision, or once you pick your point on the barometer, or once
Yeah.
you nail your flag to a mast, you stick with that, right?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
need to make sure that you back yourself, or you back that decision or stance that you take once you've made it. If you're somebody that blows with the wind, or
Yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
change your mind easily, or if you were to give it the sport analogy, you were a bandwagon fan, you were on when something was going well, or you were
Yeah,
off when
yeah,
it
yeah.
wasn't. For me, that takes from integrity. So when I look at that myself, if I make a decision or if I make a commitment to
Huh.
something, I don't horse trade it. I
Yeah, yeah.
stick with it. And that, for me, when I think of integrity, again, I answer in twos, right? On two levels, that is my definition of
Brilliant.
integrity and how I use it myself, or how I view myself as an integral person, and how I bring that forward as a value.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. No, thank you. So, as the head of, just sort of shifting a little bit, as the head of EMEA, you're responsible, obviously, for commercial success. So, we've seen the foundations of the value set that you have. But what are the behaviors that you are driving at TransferMate to help build a very customer-centric team and developing winning propositions? What's the behaviors that you're driving?
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose I've said I'll answer in twos. I'll give you three on this one. um,
Okay.
uh, I, I I think the first thing you need to do is lead, not manage, right?
Yeah,
So it's first of all by your own behavior that I set on as an example, is that I'm not into telling people what to do on a micro level.
yeah,
I want to be able to set a strategic vision for a
yeah,
team, and then be able to just say, hey guys, this is the end game and the end state. Make sure everyone's bought in, and then
yeah,
how do we get there? And I think there's three really key pieces to this. I think the first is creating an environment, like I'd mentioned before, where you have a team that are comfortable to learn and evolve
yeah, sure.
as they grow with the company. So, especially in a company like ours, right, where we're a very, very innovative company, we drive new ideas all the time, we bring new products to market. If you want to be successful in bringing those new propositions forward, your team needs to be incredibly comfortable with learning, evolving, asking questions.
Yeah,
So the first behavior I want to drive is curiosity, right? I want to make sure that I have a team, and that we have an organization that's highly curious.
yeah,
What's going on? What's next? How do we better ourselves? So I think really that's the first thing. The second thing is I want to drive innovation
yeah,
within the team, but I want to make sure that our team and our company understand that that innovation should be customer led. So a lot of what happens when you go to market then is that you have a team of people who aren't afraid to explore the
yeah,
issue that somebody has, even if we can't solve it yet,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I
So
get it.
dive into that. If you see a gap, you explore it. And I think driving that level of behavior is almost a mindset shift from somebody who wants to come in to do a 9 to 5 versus somebody who actually gets curious and is excited about what we do.
Yeah,
And being able to explore that as part of their behavior. And I think for me, it's fostering that culture through
yeah,
the values that I've mentioned before. That's the only way to make that happen. Um, and then I think the last one, I had mentioned this before about making a mistake. I call it accountability with a twist, right? So
okay.
so when some people mention the word accountability, I think there's a common misconception in the word where people almost think it's someone's fault.
Yes.
Somebody needs to be held accountable for this. I prefer accountability with a twist, right? So, and that essentially means that if you've made a mistake, or if you've perhaps taken a wrong turn, that's okay. Be accountable, but learn from it, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So take that forward,
yeah,
and as a result of that, again, you're learning, you're improving yourself, you're evolving as an individual, and I want to make sure that any team that I manage as a leader has that capacity
yeah,
where they're not afraid of making a mistake. In fact, if you've gotten to now and you're telling me you've never made a mistake, the only guarantee is that you're lying, right? So you make a plan. The only guarantee is that something's going to go wrong. It's not going to go to plan.
yeah,
So I call that accountability with a twist, and I think that's one of the core behaviors that you want to drive in a team, because how are you going to push the boundaries
yeah,
of
absolutely.
someone's abilities, of an organization, if you don't create an environment where people are comfortable of being adventurous in what they do? So a bit long-winded, I guess, Adrian, to your answer of the types of behaviors that I want to drive, but I think each of them are really, really important, because
Sure.
if you want to be on the cutting edge for a business, but I suppose more pertinent to our conversation, if you want to actually push your own boundaries, and if I want to create an environment for the teams I manage where they can realize their potential, I don't think you can do that with restrictions. You need to create an environment where people are comfortable pushing the bounds, and that those three principles are very important to me in driving those behaviors.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, Cian, you've already sort of anticipated my next question, which is very smart. So, look, I love what you're saying about innovation, by the way, because I love the fact that it's never innovation for innovation's sake. And if you're staying curious and you're saying, "Where's the gap?" Actually, let's get excited about the gap because that be it. And our innovation can be customer led, and it means we're not just throwing products over the wall, which so often happens in technology and unfortunately sometimes in payments. Now, look, I've been reliably informed you're a leader who leads with curiosity and decency. Yep. And and again, on the decency front, for me, that's not about being soft or just being nice. That's actually about creating the environment for people to grow effectively in a safe way. As you say, I love the accountability with a twist. I wonder if you could share though the connection. I think I'd love to hear your views on what's the connection between curiosity, decency, and commercial success, because that triangle isn't always seen by many. It's something the best leaders I know in the industry, and certainly something I deeply believe in myself. But I'd love your view and your lens on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, a big thanks to whoever informed you of that. Very, very, very kind words from a secret admirer I have somewhere. So very much appreciated. But I guess happy to, and I suppose the best way for me to position this to you, Adrian, is my definition of curiosity, my definition of decency,
Great, yeah,
and then I suppose where they come together. From a curiosity perspective, again, I think there's two parts to it. When I look at how people can connect with people internally and externally, and they're really the two lenses that I take. So the first piece is I want to make sure people are in a position on my team and how I lead where they can get curious internally as well as externally. So
sure.
from an internal perspective, people need to be in a position where they want to learn new products, they want to ask questions, they feel comfortable picking up the phone to anybody in the business,
Yeah,
and then they want to improve and evolve themselves. And I think it's two layered. So if I want my guys or my team to get curious internally, those are the types of behaviors I want to instill. But I've
yeah,
only really been able to figure that out by getting curious myself.
of course, of course.
People tick, how can people use those behaviors within a team to be successful? We've mentioned it on the flip side as well from an external perspective before.
Sure.
I call it value-based discussions or value-based selling in the market, which means when I'm speaking to somebody externally or when any of my team are speaking to somebody externally, they should never even mention what the company does until they actually fully understand what the actual issues of a customer are, for
Yeah,
example.
yeah,
And you can only do that by getting curious. So understanding what the other business is like, understanding where the potential gaps are before even thinking about positioning where we should be. And again, from my perspective, it's important for me that I give the tools to my team or to the organization to do that. Uh, because a lot of the times people define, what is commercial success. If you're telling me it's 100 phone calls and 250 emails, you're lying, right? I would rather 10 really good conversations versus 100 phone calls where 50 of them were voicemails and the other 50 were the wrong person within the organization. So from a curiosity perspective, I suppose that's how I view it with my lens. The second part that you've mentioned is decency. And again, I think it's twofold. That's external and internal. From an internal perspective, there's one thing that was always very well drilled into me by more than one mentor growing up, and that it takes a village to be successful.
yeah,
You cannot do that yourself. So you need the ability to collaborate across
yeah,
multiple different teams within the business, build the right relationships. And for me, when I look at where that connects with curiosity, it's how do you figure out where the common ground lies for you to connect with those different people internally, because it can't all just be business, right? From my perspective, I think there needs to be some level of, I'll call it a petri dish for interest internally, for people to be able to build those connections. And then similarly externally, I've mentioned this at the start. One of the biggest false facts that people have, or common misconceptions in general, is that businesses do business with businesses. They absolutely do not. People
yeah,
do business with people. So from a decency perspective, setting out your stall in the right way with a prospective client or somebody who's going to work with you, building a meaningful relationship with them, right? We call functions relationship management for a reason. And then to actually listen to what you're being told, right? So don't read a checklist of questions that you want answers for. Listen to what you're being told. And for me, I think once you hit that inflection point where the right level of curiosity hits the right level of decency, I think two wonderful things happen, right? I think the first one is because is you become internally bulletproof as a business. So you're very, very well joined up across your teams. You're very unlikely to have hitches where you overpromise or oversell. And then I think externally, you end up with a partner, not a client. And for me, that drives that level of commercial success. And then the byproducts of that are, you hit your number, you manage your P&L in the right way, which are, I suppose, the hard targets. But for me, I think the connection of curiosity and decency absolutely brings commercial success, because there are very key pieces of both that are needed to hit that middle point that ultimately puts you in a position where you can be successful. Otherwise, you're liable to be set up for failure or suboptimal performance.
Love that.
Long-winded again.
No, not at all. I love the fact that you said that towards the end that you actually bulletproof yourself internally, because we're driving a set of behaviors, and also, but the outcome as well is you end up with a series of partners, not clients. And actually, as you said, the byproduct of that is revenue. But revenue doesn't precede these things. Actually, starting with the individual, the leader, being curious, etc. So wonderful. Love that one. Thank you. And also the fact that a realization that there's no I in leadership. It's actually there's actually, I would say sales is the ultimate, and relationship is the ultimate team sport, because it needs everybody involved. So we touched on it earlier, but who have been the most influential people in your life and career to make you the authentic leader that you are today?
Yeah, and again, I suppose I'll break it into professional and personal. So I suppose without naming names, there are a number of different points as I've moved through my career. So look, I'm only starting to grey a small bit, so I've got plenty of runway left.
Lucky for you, Cian. Lucky for you.
But look, certainly there's already been a number of different, I suppose, touch points along my career that have been quite valuable. And I think early on, one of my first mentors gave me the advice: you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, so listen. So for me, that applies now as well, right? So I have a team of people that obviously far outnumber the one of me, and they're the guys that are driving value and success. So for me as a leader, I think it's really, really important to listen. Not only from instruction coming in from the board or people from the top, but also from your team who are actually doing the work and bringing the real success to market. So really, that was the first thing for me that set me on an early path to understand that, again, if you're not learning, you're losing, and the only way to learn is to take more input than release output, right? So from my perspective, I think that was really critical for me early on from one of my first ever mentors back from the Fiserv days. The second thing, and someone else along the way taught me this, again, back within Fiserv, is bring in a team who can do their job that you're hiring them for better than you could, right? And then the really important sub point to that is do not be threatened by it. Okay. And I've seen a lot where particular leaders or managers have been threatened by how good somebody on their team is. I was taught very early on to embrace that. Because if you can't be in a position where you're comfortable with success around you, then you shouldn't be leading. It's quite simple. There's actually a really cool quote that Michael Jordan, once said, and it was, "Earn your leadership every day." And that means that you never actually stop. You need to constantly evolve. You need to constantly be okay with bringing people into your team who are going to do a better job than you could at it, because that's why they're coming in, right? And if you don't have that right level of comfort, then I think you're in trouble. On a personal level, it 100% my parents. So growing up, I suppose my dad was always a business leader, a CEO, plenty of travel. My mom looked after all of us. There's actually 5 of us. I have 4 younger brothers.
Wow. Okay.
And I have never seen a level of, tenacity, passion, love to raise a family like my mom, which was really, really important for my values as a person. But also the same stuff, like my dad could come off a flight from Singapore on a Saturday morning and he'd be at the side of your football pitch, which was immense for me from a value perspective. But I think the one key piece of advice that he gave me professionally, which is what he does with his teams, and I've started to look to do with mine, is you take the org chart and you flip it upside down.
Yeah.
Right? Because the job in that org chart is for the leader of that team to be able to support who's on that team. And I think it's a really, really cool way of visualizing the actual role of a leader. Leaders aren't supposed to run away and take the glory and be at the top of a tree. Leaders are there to support their teams, create environments where they can be successful. And drive that behavior by leading by example. And certainly for me, as a leader, that's one of the core principles for me. I hope it's come through on the session today, Adrian, that I'm very people centric. So for me, the success of people is really, really important. And the only way that you can do that is to create those environments where they can ultimately be their best selves. So I think that for me has always stuck in my mind for anything that I've done from a leadership perspective, is that you flip that org chart upside down and you figure out how you can make those people above you really, really successful. So I think over the years, there's been 3 or 4 really, there's been plenty of advice and you never stop learning, but I think those 3 or 4 points are the ones that have certainly stood out for me, and certainly my parents have been a massive influence on me being an authentic leader, particularly when, like we spoke about at the start, they converge. It's one and the same. You can't be one person out of work and one person in it. You need to bring a level of authenticity to work and make sure that you're doing that in a very transparent way.
Wonderful, wonderful. I wonder if we could just probe a little bit further there, because particularly what you picked up about not employing stellar people to do the job you employed them to do, and then not being threatened. Because for me, we live in a highly competitive world. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I live in the southeast of England. Getting in a
Yep.
car around here is competitive. Okay, okay. Everybody wants to win and assume by me winning, you're going to lose, or if I win, then you're going to lose. I think personally in the payments industry, I personally, as a mantra of mine, I always seek 4 or 5 wins, because in the payments industry, you can't do very much on your own. Even if you're a huge bank or a huge vendor, there's somebody got another core component that's happening with it. How have you, I suppose, challenged your mindset not to be threatened by the success of other stellar people who work for you?
I think it was actually, I think it's a lot of it's based on the experiences I've had. So from my perspective, I've moved quite quickly in my career. And as I've looked around, I don't think I've taken from anyone else by being successful myself as I've risen
Brilliant,
through ranks.
brilliant.
So that I think was the first eye opener for me. The second is that just from peers within the industry, I know the effects of not hiring correctly if you feel threatened by someone or trying
Yeah,
to
yeah,
take credit and pass it on as yours. It does 2 things. Number one, it creates a really poor culture, so
yeah.
the overall performance within your team goes south. And then the second thing is it just breeds failure, right? So how are you going to bring success if you're not bringing in the best person for the job? And certainly from my perspective, if you're bringing in, I think another really good quote I love is that by empowering other people, you're not losing power. Um,
Absolutely, absolutely.
and and now I'm not saying that we all hold power or anything like that, but I think the point that that quote is really making is that you're bringing on people to be successful for the overall success of both you and the business. So I'll say it again: if you do feel threatened by somebody who's performing well within your team, you probably should not be leading that team to begin with. But I think it is really, really important, Adrian, because I have seen it across different levels of the industry, and it doesn't particularly end well. So for me, it was a really valuable piece of advice that I got early on, and I've always carried that.
Wonderful, wonderful. So you promised me, I'm really excited about the answer and response to this one, Cian. So what do you wish you knew early on in your life that you know today?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, there's 2 pieces to it. Surprise, surprise, surprise. The first part is not so interesting. I think the second is a bit more interesting. So from the first, from the first point of view, if I'm to give you the practical answer, that most people would probably give, is there's a couple of things. So I think early on, if I was to go back in time and tell myself starting out, you should view blockers as opportunities for improvement, and not insurmountable challenges. So
Yes.
I think that's really, really important. Health is wealth would be the second thing. So I spent some time in the US early on in my career. I had a hell of a lot of fun over there. I probably took the eye off the ball from a health perspective, which has other knock-on impacts in your life. So I think you need to make sure you look after that as priority one, actually, before you do anything else. Because if you don't look after yourself, and I think Anant says this a lot, actually, to give him a second shout out, if you don't look after yourself or your health, you can't look after anybody else, right? Or you can't be successful. And then I think the other thing is open your eyes, right? A lot of the time, the answer's right in front of you, that you're frantically looking for. So if I was to give you the practical answer, that would be the answer, Adrian. To give you my real answer, nothing. I don't think there's anything that I would want to know younger, at a younger and earlier stage in my career. And the reason for that is because I've developed into the type of person and the type of leader that I am now, because I didn't have anybody telling me all of the stuff that I've just told you. So I think it's really, really important to surround yourself with very, influential people that can help you. From a mentorship perspective, it's very important to learn. But I think if you're given the opportunity to know something different, I think the answer is nothing, right? Because it will then diminish the experiences that you've had
Yeah.
to
Okay, I
shape
get it. Yeah.
where you've gotten today. So, and I think those experiences are really, really important. So from my perspective, if I'm being completely truthful, it would actually be nothing, right? I wouldn't want to know anything sooner than I found it out, because I think that's
Okay.
the real way you learn.
Now, one thing I can tell you, nobody else said that, so we can guarantee that's the case. You've opened it up. I've got to answer more here. So just so I
Yeah.
can understand that. So you're valuing the learned experience that you've personally embraced and taken on board. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I've learned predominantly through two different ways, as most people do. So, you have education. So, I have a bachelor's degree and an MBA, which I
Yeah.
recently crawled over the line for after 2 long years. And then you also have the experience that you get learning by doing, right? So, getting out into the workforce, learning on the job, picking up different experiences by what you do.
Sure.
And for me, by far my most accelerated learning, um, historically and actually right now, and because you never stop, has always come from learning by doing.
Okay.
Um, so from my perspective, I think if you went back in time and told me, here's 3 things to look out for, you could write it down in a notebook, like you do in university, like you do
Mm.
in doing your MBA. But I don't think you actually feel the effects of any of that real experience until
Yeah.
you do it.
Yeah.
So for me, look, it would be nice to get that level of advice, but ultimately, I think you're
Mm.
shaped by your experiences.
Sure. Sure.
And if you don't have them, or if they're almost skipped over, I
Mm.
think that would almost diminish the value of how it's shaped you. So, God's honest truth, nothing, nothing is genuinely the answer.
Brilliant. Brilliant. So I'm sensing there that have the curiosity to explore opportunities, almost put yourself in the situation where you can experience something different, um, learn, well, do your best shots, probably fail a bit, and then rapidly try and do something that's actually, but realizing that opportunity. Would that be a fair summation of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And from my perspective, you can make those mistakes once, right? You don't make them twice, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So
sure.
and for me, I think that's really, really valuable. So if we pull it back to the topic of conversation of me as a leader, I think creating the environment to do that
Yeah.
is really, really important. Because if you're growing your people, if you're providing opportunities for success, then ultimately it's only going to have a positive impact on any business.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, Cian, thank you so much. This is normally where I try and create sort of 3 or 4 salient points for the audience and try and bring this together. But I've got a couple of pages of notes here. So I wonder if I can just sort of briefly summarize our conversation, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Fire on.
So I think first of all, when we started out looking about who's made you today as an individual and a leader, and so you said they are 2 things, but actually converging them together and actually showing up as yourself is important. And I particularly loved, if you're not learning, then you're losing. I think in terms of the values, it's pretty obvious for that they've been shaped by your parents and the environment you had, and very very loving family, but also achieving family as well there. But then integrity, also then trust, and building those foundations are fundamental for having a successful team. In terms of driving behaviors, then curiosity being the critical thing, but also taking your own responsibility for having your own curiosity. And if you're going to lead, well, you've got to show up like that to enable others. But I love what you said about innovation as well. Innovation needs to be customer led, because if it's customer led, then it's always going to be a case of it's going to have a relevancy. But embrace the fact that actually when you might not have the problem solved right now, and also the accountability with a twist, as in accountability doesn't mean let's find some blame. It's like, okay, what can we learn from that? How can we move on? How can we embrace decency and curiosity? Again, I love the way you broke that down into two. That's an internal piece and an external piece, but recognizing it takes a village to build an individual and a collaboration relationships. But I like the fact that almost you viewed curiosity as almost insulating and bulletproofing internally the collective conversation, but then externally moving from people to having clients to ultimately having partners. And also, I think you can say we want to have a bit of fun along the way as well. This is human relations, and people do buy from people. And the truth is, I'm sure the odd conversation happens over a pint as well at various points. I think that in terms of influential, again, I think you've obviously had some excellent mentors who've helped you through that process, but some obvious things like one mouth, two ears, but actually listen, because you're going to learn more from your team as well as other individuals. What you said then about recruiting people in on character, giving them the chance to do the job you've asked them to do, and when they've done it and when they've excelled at it, actually, that person hasn't taken anything away from you. I think that's a really seriously mature leadership mindset, and also, dare I say, quite rare. There's plenty of examples in the world where that's not always the case. And then early on, then I love then you were saying that so the responsibility about flipping the triangle from your dad and saying actually you're also in service of your people to enable them, not take away from them. And then the answer that you said about early on in your career, look, health is wealth, and opening your eyes to see what's there in front of you, but actually you wouldn't change anything, because the lived experience has enabled you to grow, to flourish, and also it sounds to me like it's just an ongoing situation you have where you're always looking to learn, you're always looking to stay curious. That was my summation of our conversation. Anything you'd add to that, so?
Yeah, no, look, absolutely. Fair play to that. You've nailed it. So that's great. If I could just, I suppose, leave listeners with one thing, and it's probably one of my favorite quotes. So one of the things that I've always tried to do, as I've gone throughout my career, particularly as a leader, is do it in a behavioral way. So make sure that you're driving the right values, leading by example, leading like managing, like I've mentioned. So you have to earn that leadership. And Brian Tracy, obviously, who's a motivational speaker, a Canadian American motivational speaker, once said, become the type of leader that people would follow voluntarily, even if you had no title or position. And I think that's a really poignant point, because it for me is the difference between an org chart manager versus a true leader of a team. So from my perspective, if I was to leave listeners with anything that I suppose ties up your very accurate summary of the discussion, I think it would be something like that. But look, Adrian, I've really enjoyed it. So thank you very much for asking me on, and an absolute honor to come onto your show.
Well, Cian, thank you very much. I think that's a wonderful way to close. So I look forward to catching up with you soon. And thanks so much indeed.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Awesome.
All done?
Yeah.